How important is meditation to the human race?
When we're young, we don't know any better. We're still developing our sense of self. We don't know any better. It's only later that we can look back and see, wow, here's a sense of self, if we're lucky enough to see that. Many people through life don't even question their sense of self. They're just who they are. But we want to begin to investigate, because particularly if this self is generating a lot of suffering, maybe I want to understand more about what's causing this.
We're reacting to life constantly, program responses, instead of exerting free will. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Absolutely. Our habitual conditioning towards our identity that keeps on fulfilling itself. Yeah. But when we begin to awaken, we can begin to change that. There's no need to look outside your window, for everything you need to know is inside you.
Hi, I'm Steve from LifeMasteryPodcast.com, and with me is Bob Stahl. Bob is deep into meditation and teaching you how you can do it better and have a better life.
Thank you, Stephen. Honored to be here.
Bob, please tell our audience a little bit about the very important work that you do.
I teach mindfulness meditation in a few different venues. One is in Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. I worked for the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, the Center for Mindfulness, for many years. I'm an adjunct senior teacher doing professional teacher trainings and meditation retreats all over the world, as well as I work for the Brown University Mindfulness Center, the same thing, doing trainings and retreats. In addition to that, I teach what's known as Insight meditation retreats worldwide as well.
And how important is meditation to the human race?
The heart of meditation is, and from the mindfulness perspective, is to grow with more awareness that can begin to develop deeper understanding into the places that we're not seeing clearly, that often cause a lot of suffering and pain within each other. So you can say that the practice of meditation is about growing more wisdom, more compassion, being able to see through the stories that at times separate and enslave us.
I enjoy meditation, and it's been extremely beneficial for me. My daughter does as well occasionally, not as often as I'd like, but she's only 12. My wife falls asleep during it. What do people do? I've heard certain people say, I fall asleep when I meditate, even sitting up, even with the lights on. Some people get out of breath when they meditate, maybe breathing in too deeply. For the beginner, then give up so easily. Can you fill in the blanks a little bit?
Many people report that they fall asleep a lot when they begin a meditation practice, and I want to say that is absolutely normal. And many of us do not realize just how tired we are until we stop and become more aware of our body and mind. And one of the first things we become aware of is how tired we are. We end up falling asleep because we're not filling that space doing something. We're cultivating more the quality of being. I was teaching a retreat in Spain a couple of years ago, and we were speaking about this, and just feel this wave in the room, as I mentioned, that we've lost the art of siesta. And these people just kind of sigh, like everyone understood. I heard stories of people saying, yeah, my parents, like whenever after lunch, they'd come home and take a nap, and we can't do that anymore. We've lost touch of our own biorhythms, our circadian rhythms, and so many of us are very exhausted, and we don't even know it until we stop. And so this is a very normal occurrence. And so what we'll suggest with people as an antidote to work with sleepiness is, number one, if you're really exhausted, take a nap, get some more rest. This may be very un-American, maybe do less rather than more. Meditate sitting with your eyes open. Stand up when you meditate. So there's different measures that we can take, but also we want to support people to get rest. If you're realizing that might be your very first insight is how exhausted you are and you never took the time to actually feel into your body and mind.
Great point.
As far as the breathing, even though universally everyone breathes, it's very interesting. And a good thing it's governed on the autonomic nervous system so that we don't have to be fully responsible for it. But when we begin to bring attention to the breath, I'll hear reports of people stopping breathing momentarily or starting to hyperventilate. And so these are occurrences that happen on an occasional basis. Sometimes it might be evoking a little bit of anxiety. And so we might want to work with a particular that particular type of situation by, number one, just helping that person to acknowledge that those feelings can be there. That's also normal. Also, perhaps provide other resources. If it gets too anxiety provoking, maybe we can actually shift the meditation object. Many people with having challenges with the breath will invite them to be mindful of sounds, listening to sounds. And for many, that is a good counter to working with the breath. And so sometimes there's other objects that we can introduce as a way to help settle and steady the mind. And then when there's a building of more confidence, people can come back into the breathing. So we can work with that. I'll mention one more that's very prevalent as far as challenges in meditation, and that is people discover how much their minds are wandering, how little of the time are they actually in the present moment, and how most of the time they're lost in the future or lost in the past, missing what's happening now. And you could say that mindfulness meditation is a training to develop the steadying of the mind and the body. The mind goes off, you bring it back. It goes off, you bring it back. And through that repetition, just like if you go to the gym and you're working with the barbells, gradually through that repetition, it builds muscle mass. And in the same way, the repetition of bringing a mind back when it wanders off begins to build that muscle of concentration. But it will take time. And so the quality of patience is very important. And that's also a wonderful counter to another very common challenge, which is restlessness or boredom, crawling out of my skin. Am I going to die? Has anyone ever died of boredom doing the meditation?
Sure.
So, and of course, sometimes it's doubt. What am I doing here? This is the craziest thing I ever did. And
where's the immediate gratification? I mean, I don't feel any better now.
I am just sitting here wanting and wanting and wanting. I want to do this, I want to do that, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. So it's very common when we begin practice, and even for experienced meditators, they will experience at times while they're sitting all these wants, all these not wants, all this restlessness, all this sleepiness, all this doubt. And just to normalize, it's actually written meditation manuals that when you meditate, you will encounter these. And the antidote with all of these is mindfulness. Because once we become aware that we're caught, we can begin to get ourselves a bit uncaught.
Yeah. Do you feel that it's more common in people that are older than younger? Because I know I started picking it up in my early 20s, but I really did nothing with it. Jon Kabat-Zinn, when he wrote Full Catastrophe Living in 2005, I stumbled across it. I think I was a therapist friend had mentioned it to me, and I found it fascinating. And I fell right off, I intellectually understood how important it was, but I was unable to implement it into my life until many, many years later.
It takes time to cultivate a practice, be it young or older.
All right, balance off the craziness of our minds, the craziness of our lives, the multitasking, the constant noise in our head of thinking of the future and the past and very rarely in the moment.
When one understands just how busy our minds are going off into the future and the past, when one begins to understand that life is incredibly fragile and incredibly precious, and this desire to have less chaoticness, less suffering, less craziness, the desire to pause, to get in touch with what's going on within one's body, mind, and heart becomes important, and one begins to aspire towards making some time to stop and to sit and to feel be aware of this one precious life.
Yeah, what would you say to the people that say, I'd rather just try to avoid all those things that promote anxiety, headaches, panic attacks, because that's the first thing the body wants to do is avoid it.
Yeah. I want to recognize and acknowledge that is a coping strategy, and it can be helpful. Like you go to the gym and work out and get the endorphins going. And there's a number of different, go and sing, go and run. There's a number of different ways that we can work with these stresses, and avoidance is one. What we find sometimes with avoidance is an old line from a Grateful Dead song, you can run, but you can't hide. That no matter how much you try to run away, it continues to follow you.
We can run, but we can't hide from it.
And so there may be a wisdom at times to begin to turn in. And, in another example, like this is more of a health example, like let's say you have an acid indigestion. And so you can take some of these acid indigestion tablets to help neutralize the acid. That's a good thing. It's alleviating your suffering. But wouldn't it be nice to know what's actually causing you to take those tablets that have that upset stomach and begin to understand more of the underpinnings, the roots of what's fueling and driving our suffering? And so in the same way, with the avoidance, yes, it takes us away from the pain, but it just kind of suppresses it. It doesn't quite go away. And just when you're not looking, you'll hear a little knock on the door of your consciousness saying, I'm back again. In time, it may be also wise to address these and to begin to acknowledge these feelings and so forth. But we live also in a culture that is a pain-denying culture. And, one colleague once said, who said we had to be happy in the first place? That's caused a lot of problems. But, like when you think of it, even the word health insurance, it ain't health insurance, it's sickness insurance. And death insurance is actually, it's life insurance. It's not, but it's about death. And so there's a certain fundamental pain-denying culture. Just turn the channel, go do this, go do that, to try to get away from our pain. And, maybe sometimes it's helpful, but it would also be nice to understand what's underlying.
You being a teacher, a leader in this industry, well, I would say industry, in this movement, you have friends and obviously, and people you come across that are in need of this type of information. Do you find it helpful to mention it before they ask? Do you find as though that you end up being pushy in a sense, or people don't look at it as helpful when you mention, oh, by the way, you should really be more introspective and meditate more. It might help you with this, that, or the other thing. Or do you wait for people to come to you? What works better? Because I found people, they don't want to know unless they ask. And even when they ask, a lot of times they don't want to know your opinion.
I think that's more the case. There's an old saying, everybody likes a Buddha, but no one likes a Buddhist. So, I think teaching by example, like in the relational, like if someone gets a sense as you're talking with them that they're really interested in you and that they want to understand you, they want to listen to you. Many of us, we love to talk about ourselves and we love to be listened to be understood. And so I think in some sense, being humble and listening kindly, then people might say, gosh, I heard that you do something about meditation. Tell me about this. I'm really interested, because they can sense that you're embodying something that I want to know about this.
Yeah, I believe that as well. And the only reason why I believe it is because I've tried everything else and nothing else works. It seems as though when we have issues with ourselves, we're rarely willing to look at ourselves. So we'll look at the other person or whatever's happening around us and try to alter that. And if it's a person or people, it's almost impossible to alter. So, after many years of putting the emphasis on other people, I started putting the emphasis on myself. And it's extremely difficult to change oneself, but it's impossible to change somebody else.
That's I think, totally correct.
What could somebody do right now, like immediately? What's a good first step? Someone watching this saying, I know I need to get my act together. I know something's missing from my life. They may be looking outside for it. Everyone's looking for the better job, the better house, the better car, the better partner, the better this, the better that. But we know it's internal, right, Bob?
Recognizing that there's some suffering, stress, challenges in life, and wanting to be proactive in doing something about it, which is a very beautiful thing. We can begin getting in touch with our own reliance, so we can begin to do something. I'd recommend, one thing that's actually very prevalent in the world is mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's more offered in a mainstream way, that's offered in hospitals. That might be a wonderful way to learn a practice and learn with a group of people. There's also, if you just did an internet search for mindfulness meditation sitting groups, you would find probably a number of these around, most, depending on, like in New York, I'm sure there's lots of them, but depending on where
What's a sitting group?
So people come together and sit and meditate together.
Oh.
Like here in Santa Cruz, where I live in California, we have a meditation center called Insight Santa Cruz, and we have sittings every day of the week at different times, and people come from the community that are interested in mindfulness and come in and sit for 45 minutes for a half hour. So there's, and then also even online on the internet, there's ways you can probably find, like we're communicating through Zoom right now. I think there's actually, here's one right here. At the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, the Center for Mindfulness, they have a sitting group that meets on Zoom every Thursday of the year at noon Eastern Standard Time, and there's no fee to this. Contact them and get the Zoom link, and then you can and there's no strings attached. But it's every noon on Thursdays, and so there's other things like that. But that's a wonderful example of plugging right in.
Great. And how often would you say someone should meditate? I know everybody's different. Everyone's got different stress levels, but should it be every day? Should it be twice a day, generally speaking? The more the better. Would it be more the better?
I look at it more, having a daily practice is very, very helpful. Sometimes we'll consider two aspects to the mindfulness meditation practice. One is a formal practice where we are sitting on purpose or lying down on purpose or standing on purpose. So you can do it in any posture, and that your intention is to be mindful of the breath or sounds or do a body scan meditation in a more formal way. And then there's the informal practices of bringing our mindfulness into our day-to-day activities, that no matter what we're doing, eating a sandwich, folding laundry, washing the dishes, going for a walk, we can bring our mindful presence to it. So in some ways, I would say mindfulness is more of a way of life. It's a way of orienting our life towards being present. And so it can be done informally, practicing in our day-to-day activities, as well as formally by sitting and doing a meditation practice. And, and many people discover, and I mentioned this a little earlier about the wanderings of the mind, and many of us will discover how little of the time that we actually are present, that most of the time we're living in the future. That's just the nature of our minds at times. But the practice of mindfulness is very compassionate. And one of the beautiful things that we'll say is the moment you realize that you're not present, you are present. And then it begins again. So even if you're beginning your practice and you're discovering that you're not mindful hardly any of the time, that's normal. And rather than putting yourself down for not being mindful, we congratulate ourselves that we realize that we were not mindful and we're back again. And so may this practice be fused with compassion, a kind way of training. There's a colleague of mine that speaks about training a puppy to learn how to sit, to stay, so forth. And you can train it very rigidly and very tightly, and that dog will learn those commands, but often those dogs become neurotic and confused. They're skittish, their attitudes. And conversely, you could train a dog with a lot of kindness, and eventually in time it will learn those commands as well. But often those dogs become more confident and flexible. And so the training of kindness helps support our flexibility and confidence. We don't want to train in such a way that feeds our neuroses, that becomes an aggression, even of self-improvement. We bring that to our practice as aggression, and that's counter to the deeper purpose of mindfulness. It's to befriend, to begin to see through these stories that begin to enslave us, these stories that feed our sense of feeling that we are deficient, inadequate, unworthy, and so.
Right. Do you find that the thoughts in our minds that people feel as though that's really them? It's almost like the habitual thinking about negative things over and over again. Like somebody gives you a compliment, that might last about 2 seconds in our psyche, and then it's just released. But someone does something that we deem as being negative in any sense, we'll mull that over and over again, and we'll beat us. I should have said this. I should have done that. Why do you think that? If you agree with that, why do you think that is so prevalent over being able to bask in the compliments or the positive things in life? They seem fleeting.
I think that there's no coincidence to that way of identifying with oneself, because mindfulness and meditation is a radical act of actually beginning to investigate with this sense of the identity, the solidification of what I call I, me, and my. Is it really even true? And that's a radical act even to ask that question, because many of us would think it's absolutely preposterous. I am what I am because that's the way I am. I'm Papa the Sailor Man.
Man.
Like this is, what do you mean? But, when you think of it, we were born and we were like a little piece of clay, and we get shaped by our experience. By those closest to us in school and education. And if we're coming across in the development of our personality messages that were not going to amount to anything, I remember one person saying, the only thing I remember about my mother is she kept on saying to me, "I wish I never had you." That's a very strong statement. And I've heard stories that I won't repeat here now, but there's many self-defacing stories that we were brought up in such conditions and at the same time developing our sense of personality that we lose our sense of self-worth, self-confidence, and we identify with this, and this has become who it is that we are. And to me, it's only through the practices of awareness that we can begin to see this identity that we have, the stories that we keep on telling ourselves. And now that we begin to see these stories, we potentially can begin to see through them and transform them. That person I was referring to about her mother saying that she wished she never had her. I met this woman at a meditation retreat, and through very deep work she did on herself, she began to realize that in her entire professional career, she was a midwife. She'd helped give birth to thousands of kids, and she just began to realize that actually maybe I am okay. And so this positive, like beginning to see these identities that we tell ourselves and becoming less enslaved by them. This is the most powerful and radical gift of awareness, of mindfulness, to begin to see through these stories.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was beautiful.
And when we're young, we don't know any better.
I know.
We're still developing our sense of self. We don't know any better. It's only later that we can look back and see, wow, here's a sense of self, if we're lucky enough to see that. Many people through their lives don't even question their sense of self. They're just who they are. But we want to begin to investigate, because particularly if this self is generating a lot of suffering, maybe I want to understand more about what's causing this.
Yeah. It's so necessary, don't you think? I mean, without it, we give up free will, don't you think? Because we're reacting to life constantly. Program responses, instead of exerting free will. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Absolutely. Our habitual conditioning towards our identity that keeps on fulfilling itself.
Yeah.
But when we begin to awaken, we can begin to change that.
Yeah. Well, I was a hospice volunteer for quite a while after both my parents died, and I was kind of drawn to it after the experience of taking each of my parents to the very last second, in my parents' home for my dad and in my home for my mother a couple of years later. And it was really interesting that the second they passed, I had no connection to their bodies whatsoever. You know what I mean? It was like what made them special, human themselves, was the life force. It wasn't the body at all. It made me start looking more and more in this direction. And that's when I started reading Full Catastrophe Living and stuff like that. And at what point in your life did you realize that this was necessary to you?
In some ways, my journey goes back a long time. When I was 4 years old, I had my first realization that I was going to die and everyone was going to die, and it could happen at any moment. And then between the ages of 4 and 9, I lost a younger brother that I shared a room with. He died of an illness. My best friend, who I played with every day after school, died one night into a coma and died. And then my grandfather, who lived downstairs, died of a heart attack. And so by the age of 9, I had experienced a lot of death. And I was very lost and confused for many, many years. And it was in undergraduate school that I, after having flunked out and being readmitted back on warning, and I wasn't interested in the conventional courses anymore, science, history, arithmetic, so forth. I was just so lost and confused, and I ended up taking a class in the wisdom of the East. And, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Zen. I had no idea what I was getting into. The professor was quite a remarkable human being and embodied. It was like a messenger, that there's more to life than what appears to be. And it begins by looking inward. And so it was through reading the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, The Way of Life, the Book of the Tao, really influenced me. There's one particular epigram, number 47, that says, "There's no need to look outside your window." I'm paraphrasing this. "There's no need to look outside your window, for everything you need to know is inside you." And I kept on reading that, and I began to realize if I want to know something about all my confusion of being lost, I didn't even know I was so lost and confused. I think that's how lost and confused I was. But at that time, I think I began to get some hint. I'm so lost. I need to look inside. So that was the beginning, really, of my meditative journey. But it had awakened many years earlier when I realized that this life was not going to last.
Did you notice the quality of your relationship shift at all during this period?
It did, but in some ways wonderfully, and in some ways not wonderfully. Because at the time, before I got flunked out of school, I was majoring in getting drunk, getting high on drugs, and trying to have girlfriends. And so when this began to happen, some of those friends like, "What the hell's going on with you? You're not drinking with us anymore. You're not getting high with us anymore. You want to be alone more." Of course, other friends that were really more into the internal spaces were I developed other friendships. And it wasn't like I wanted to not like these drinking buddies or drug buddies. I like these people, but and it was difficult for me to be with them without using the substances as well. I was happy to be with them without doing substances, but I didn't want to do them. I wanted to look more inwards. And I remember particularly with one old friend who I thought we were very close. He was very upset with me.
Yeah. The ability to connect with another human being intimately and get better and easier as
1,000%, because I'm not very good. I'm not a chit chatter and a schmoozer. I like to be with people in the deepest of ways. And so, a lot of my work now with my wife, and we travel all over the world teaching meditation retreats, and we get to be in all these different cultures and be with people in the deepest of ways. Sometimes people ask, "Well, did you go see this site? Did you go see that site?" Because, well, I saw some of the sites, but the biggest site of all is being with people in the most authentic and human way. There's no more beautiful sight than the human heart. And so being with people, I want to be with people in the deepest of ways. You work with hospice. I used to work with hospice. My wife is a retired hospice nurse and chaplain. And so, about being at the beds, being in the realest of ways. And so in meditation retreats, I'm with people, the quality. I want to be with people in the deepest of ways.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
On earth, and particularly at this time, with such hatred. The world needs love so desperate, awareness and love. And it's powerful as I do a lot of these travels around the world. There is many places where people are wanting to bring more awareness and love into their hearts and into the culture. And this is, to me, the only hope that we have.
It is.
And I always like to feel that love is stronger than fear, but it's really very fearful out there.
I know. Love for oneself probably has to be at the foundation of this, don't you think? Because how can you really truly love anybody else if you really are not okay and love yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the complications that arise from not being at that point with oneself has to make life more complicated. Just has to. Have there been any early influencers in your life? Any authors? Any people in general? Did you read a book? Did you go, hey, like John Kabat-Zinn for me in 2005?
Yeah, John. By the time I got Full Catastrophe Living, I was many years already on the path. But I was amazed when I did read. I was actually working at a stroke center as a counselor, and I was already introducing mindfulness to people living with stroke, Parkinson's, MS, other neurological or orthopedic conditions, and getting very positive results from people. I remember this one woman saying, "Yeah, this mindfulness stuff is going to keep me out of a convalescent home." And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, look at me. I'm an old lady. I got to get up in the middle of the night and I got to go to the toilet and pee. And so I'm mindful with my walker, lifting, moving, placing. Because I'm mindful of walking, I'm not going to fall and break my hip and end up in a convalescent facility." And, I'd hear those type of practical things of people beginning to meet their right leg that's no longer working the way that once does, and opening and developing a relationship with it, and with more wisdom, with more kindness.
Yeah, I think one of the books that just popped into my mind just now, before I became a hospice volunteer years ago, was Tuesdays with Maury.
Mm-hmm.
That I really found that fascinating. I think that was around the time my second parent was sick, and I found that really helpful because for years I had this. They've been gone for almost 20 years now. But I probably had 15 years of worry of dying early. Right now I'm 56 years old, but the last 5 years I've been able to get rid of that and replace it with more mindfulness and being in the moment and more introspective work. And I feel a lot freer now. But for many years after that, I felt I was very bound by that feeling, those thoughts that it was going to be early for me because they died early,
May it not be so. There's a Chilean poet. He's actually a Nobel Prize winner. His name is Pablo Neruda. And he has a poem called Keeping Quiet. And in the midst of this poem, there's a few lines that, to me, point to why we would stop and why we would meditate. One of the most eloquent ways of expressing that. And he says, if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps this huge silence might interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. That's a beautiful. This is why we stop. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps this huge silence might interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and of threatening ourselves with death. Perhaps the earth can teach us when everything seems to be dead in winter and later proves to be alive. So why don't we just sit for a minute and sit in the silence together. And let's want to invite the listeners to bring awareness to the breath, breathing normally and naturally, and being aware that you're breathing in as you're breathing in and out. And if for whatever reason the breath is not helpful, bringing awareness into the ears and listening to the different sounds as they come and go, being present. And if you find your mind wandering off, acknowledging it kindly and returning back to either the breath or to sounds, being present. May all beings discover the gateways into the heart, and may there be peace. So thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Bob.
For listening, and wish you all a good day. And may you remember the moment you realize you're not present, you are. And the practice begins again.
It's been a real pleasure meeting you, Bob.
Yeah, likewise. I feel like you're a brother on the path, and I really appreciate your sincerity.
Thank you. And let's stay in touch, definitely. Please.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.